So again, welcome to our demo day number 3, which is all about SAM PuttStudio. And maybe we just start again with a video which has been pre-recorded to introduce you into our studio. So I always need to pop it up in the background, and then once I'm ready, I will switch into the screen share mode. And again, I forgot to activate the sound.
Platforms.
So I apologize, but we will start again.
The SAM PuttStudio is the most advanced studio solution worldwide. We integrate premium technology. Not only our technology, we also integrate platforms. Everything is synchronized, everything runs automatically. You don't need to operate the different softwares. Everything is just controlled by our studio interface. You can switch on and off the components. Everything will record automatically. We will readjust, recalibrate for different slopes of the platform. We integrate also platforms. And this is an incredible learning environment for different purposes, like training plans, like gaming, like break putt training. Let us go through this step by step. So actually what we do now is not only using PuttLab Video 3D, we will also use the high-speed ball tracking camera, which is mounted to the ceiling. This is at a frequency of about 100 Hertz, which is enough to give you accurate data on your putt. This is actually like a launch monitor for putting, extending the data from your stroke into the putt, which is also important. Maybe for some purpose like fitting, very important, because actually we do not only fit the putter to your needs relative to your stroke, we also want to fit the putter relative to the best outcome on the course, which is also ball action. We will look at now ball tracking on a straight putt first without projection. We can just look at ball tracking to show you what you can see on straight putts first, although we know if it starts getting to angles, to slopes, it's much more fun to see what's going on for the student also if you implement all the feedback. But on straight putts, for ball tracking and ball performance, this can also be used. Now let me bring back my student and let me play him a couple of putts. First, I start a training again, and now inside of the training dialog, I select the ball tracking report for PuttLab. We already have selected a report for 3D. We activate video, ball tracker, and projection at this point is off. We can select different targets first, so we can use multiple targets. Basically, this can be physical targets, but it can also be a projected target. You can use as many different targets as you want. You just need to pre-select. Inside of a training plan, you will be guided through a protocol where you need to play to different holes. PuttLab is calibrated always to the correct hole, and all the data will be referenced to the appropriate hole. You might also use a standalone mode where you don't even use the starting position. You can freely work through the surface, putt from different positions without a sensor, and ball tracking will recognize where your starting position is, and then we project different targets. This is a completely independent mode inside of a training plan, which can be then developed into a combined test where you need to play very different putts, straight putts, uphill, downhill, left, right, right, left, and then we can give you an overall score. So there are kind of indefinite options using this SAM Studio to practice with your putting. Now we only have one hole here, so we use this hole and we start the software. We need one calibration first, please. Okay, and then we are ready to go. You see high-speed video is already active. We might select a different report up there. Maybe I do a split screen report for ball data. We can do this afterwards also. Okay, just play a first putt, please. Okay, very nice. So we see the stroke up there. We can now do a split screen where on the lower screen you see the same putt which has been just played and now also displayed on the PuttLab report. It is replayed in parallel to the high-speed video. Again, both systems are synchronously controlled. So if you look at not only the putter, also the ball position, this is one-to-one synchronized. Now you have the option to look at different aspects of your stroke, to look at different aspects of what the ball does, and to high-speed video. And at the same time, we can now look at data relative to this putt. So if I turn on the screen for ball performance data, now for this putt, we can look at very different aspects relative to ball performance, which would be starting direction of the ball relative to the target, 0.4 left. Launch speed, 0.20. Smash factor, 165. Skid distance, 47 centimeters. Skid time, 274 milliseconds. Speed drop, 32%. Roll speed, 1.37 meter per second. Roll ratio, 85%. Relative distance to the putt, 17 centimeters short. Ball position side is 1.3 centimeters to the right. And actually we also measure the effective stimp of the green. This is a 12 stimp surface, and actually for this putt we recalculated the stimp to 11.8, which matches actually to the surface. So this is a straight putt, no break, no slope. And this data certainly can now be used for fitting in a way that relative to your putter, to your tool, but also relative, let's say, to your angle of attack, to your launch angle of the putt, which changes the skid phase. We might optimize roll ratio, we might optimize skid time in reducing skid time, and so on. So this can all be done here, and we have done this for one putt. Now let us look at what happens if we play several putts.
Okay, this was just the introduction into this system, and we will continue going more deep into all the details of reporting once we have more putts, and we will also discuss afterwards a little bit the ball performance parameters. In between, I will check if in the chat there are some messages to be answered. Okay, so first of all, there is a question: how high does the camera mount on the ceiling need to be for the ball tracker to work properly? This depends a little bit on the area you want to cover. Okay, so if you are at a height of about 2.5 meters, you can cover an area of 4 meters by 2.5 meters. So to translate this to US imperial metrics, I think this is roughly 15 feet by 8 feet, something like that, which is covered. And then the more you go up, the more you have area which is covered. Same is true for projection. We need about 2.5 meter between the lens and the surface to cover again this 4 by 2.5 meter area. If you are lower, the area will be smaller. If you're higher, the area will be up. The camera is considerably accurate. So if you move higher, let's say to 3 meters, and you cover a range of 5 meters, the data is still accurate. So this is not really a problem. What is the best stimp speed for SAM PuttLab or range that is most recommended? Yeah, that depends certainly a little bit on what you want to see. So we all know that if you have a faster surface, you get better feedback. This might be for amateurs a little bit over challenging. If you have a 3% of slope on a stimp 12, this is quite a difficult putt. But it shouldn't be too slow, because the faster the ball, the more you see the effect of gravity, because based on vector algebra, the faster the green, the slower the putt, and the more the gravity will work, the more the ball will curve, and the more you would see. So I would recommend to use a stimp of 11 to maybe 12, not too fast. So there are stimps out there on artificial greens up to 13, 14. This is maybe too much. But if you go to 11, 12, you can still play 3% of slope, and 3% is quite a bit. So I think this would be the perfect environment. Well, the minimum or maximum length on the putt on the surface is up to you. You can play 1 meter, or you can play 4 or 5 meters. Now, actually, maybe this would come later in the presentation. You can even play longer putts, because we have a simulation and we would prolong the putt even if the surface ends. So you might even play a longer putt, and we can calculate where the ball would go. For example, for distance control, we might even play a 10 meters putt on the surface, and we would predict where the ball would go. But actually, the limitation is the size of your surface. Yes, the standard putting perfection platform is 14 by 5. But there are larger options also. It depends a little bit on what you need in your environment. Okay. So if we stay in straight putts, and we prolong this now a little bit into discussing the data for a couple of putts by looking at, for example, the spread of the putts and what the ball data would tell us.
Okay, let's play another putt. Okay, this putt was much faster, and we can certainly see now differences in launch speed, which is much higher. Smash factor is roughly the same. Skid distance and skid time is prolonged because the putt was a little bit faster. Speed drop was in the same range, so we can now look at differences. And normally we would let him again play a couple of putts and look at the summary report for ball performance data, and then this data can be used for fitting. So let's just play another putt or a couple of putts. Very nice. Okay, so we can look now at the averages, and we can also look at ball performance data. If we pop up the measurement report, so we store this data and we look at it again in the normal report. Now we get an overall view on his performance for this putt, which is he met direction by 91%, which is a very high number, but he also met the speed by 92%. So these putts were good speed-wise and direction-wise, and there's also something like distance consistency, which is a coefficient of missed distances relative to the length of the putt. So the percentage of missed distance relative to the length of the putt, which was very small here. In this graph, you see in the gray range the optimum putt, and if these bullets, which represent the single putts, are inside of the gray range, he met the task perfectly. So this is all at a very high level, and we have now the chance to scroll through different reports. We could look at again the data for relative direction, relative speed, which is not putt data, which is coming from the ball tracking data. So the ball started in a direction which was almost always ideal, and also the speed was almost always ideal. A little bit of variation, but not too bad. So, and this corresponds to this scoring. So direction for launch was perfect. Actually, he holed most of these putts. And then we look at distance control, and we see different data for distance control, which is average ball distance, which is distance variability. We said it's 1.4% only distance variability, so he was able to really get the same speed for all these putts. We can also look at ball speed at the hole, which is not really foot by speed, which is more the speed the ball has at the edge of the hole, which would then determine the probability of the ball going into the hole or not. We would recommend an entry speed of 0.5 meter per second, which is corresponding to 85 to 87% of percentage of the ball going into the hole, which is kind of a compromise between a slow putt with a very high probability, but at the same time a slow putt might not even reach the hole, but it shouldn't be too high the speed so the ball doesn't lip out. So he met the ideal speed at the hole also for 6 of the putts very closely. One was off because it was too short, and then the distance to the hole was certainly because the balls were holed ideal for most of the putts. So this is for judging on distance, and then we can look at the ball data, and again you will see the averages we just discussed, which can be used for ball fitting and for putter fitting. Maybe one thing I need also to mention, because the balls were holed, it might be difficult to judge on what the ball would do behind the hole. We have built in a simulation mode where you could then prolong the balls also behind the hole. So this would be the effective position behind the hole if you wouldn't have holed the putts. So we can also estimate where the ball would have gone relative to entry speed and direction, which gives you a different picture. So this would be the ball positions. If there wouldn't be a hole, maybe you just use a tee or a coin or a marker, then you would get a different result, and we can show you exactly where the ball would have gone even though you hold the putt, which for some analysis would be important. And for all the different putts up here, you can replay the putt, you can look at it from different perspectives, you can look at it from the hole, you can travel with the ball. So there are a lot of options, and certainly this makes much more fun, as I said, if you have a breaking green, but also for straight putts, you can use all these tools to really go deep into ball performance analysis.
Okay, so this was already much more into depth, and let me just pop this up again in PuttLab so that you see some more of the details. And this is exactly the same set of putts which we've just have seen. So let me discuss a couple of things here. So first of all, the ball simulation. So if I switch this on, you see we would then calculate where the ball would have gone, which is basically then important information to judge on distance control rather than just calculating for the balls inside of the hole. Maybe what is really important here is to understand what is the ideal putt, and this would become even more important if it's starting to break. So we decided to not only go for a foot by speed, because a foot by speed is maybe an optimum solution for a specific environment, like let's say a stimp 11 on a straight putt. But if you would calculate for different environments like uphill, downhill, breaking putts and different stims, then the foot by speed might not completely match up. So maybe I would need to pop up some data on that. We could, for example, go to this picture here. I hope you can see that. So let's say we talk about stimp 12, and then relative to your entry speed, you would end up with different optimum speeds or different distances behind the hole relative to what you select. So for example, if you would select a specific entry speed, let's say 0.6 meter per second, then the distance behind the hole would be very, very short for an uphill putt. If the uphill putt is 2%, you would be only 90 centimeters behind the hole. And if you would be 2% downhill, this entry speed would result in a distance behind the hole of 45 centimeters. Other way around, if you would just select a foot by speed, like 28, then this would have different entry speeds relative to your slope. So there is an interdependency between slope and distance behind the hole and hole size. And what we decided here at this point in time to select a ball speed into the hole of 0.5 meter per second, which then would correspond to a vertical hole size, which you see on the left here. Certainly 50% the ball diameter and the width of the hole. If you had 50%, the ball would no longer go in. So this is kind of the borderline where you down here, it would be impossible to hold the putts. So you want to have the hole as wide as possible to not lip out. At the same time, you want to have a reasonable speed. So if you are at 5 meters per second, your hole size is more than 80% still, but you might decide to play it slower or faster. So our fastest entry speed is normally 1 meter per second, which would correspond to about a little bit less than 70% of hole size. And the slowest entry speed, which will then be shown in slowest and fastest putt in the projection, would be 0.1. Now we would allow you in the software to select between different entry speeds and different distances behind the hole. So this is then up to you. This is not actually built in, but we will do that. So if you see data for the effective ideal putt, then this might be based on calculation relative to entry speed or to a specific distance past hole. And then we come up with the ideal speed of 2.28 for this putt and ideal aim if it starts breaking. Okay, next graph here, which is much more in detail. So you see the spread of the different putts. The gray ranges here are not that strict as in PuttLab, where there's a clear border between tour players range at 75 and the outlying data. Here we have more a gray shade, meaning that, well, you can compensate. And this is again seen here. You can compensate for a slower speed with more brake, or for less speed with also for higher speed with less brake. So you can compensate. So these are kind of more ranges you work in. Still there is an ideal which is in the center, and relative to what you select as ideal, you see the data. And maybe some words on this screen, which you have not really be able to see clearly in the video. So we calculate different data for launch factors, for skid phase, and for ball roll. And without going into details, this data can tell you something about the efficiency of your stroke or impact or the tool you play. So there are certainly differences in the skid phase relative to your launch angle and the putter you play. And certainly there are also differences in behavior of the ball. But additionally, you see standard deviation, which is kind of the variation of all these factors, which also should be low. So if I would give you 2 or 3 different putters into your hand, we would end up with different results. And then you might judge which is the appropriate putter relative to ball performance also. Let's say different hosel designs, different loft, different weight. This all would influence this data. And we also show some raw data. So this is the raw data for speed. If I switch off the ball simulation, you see the speed curve ends early because these putts were holed. So a putt which rolls out is normally about 4 seconds until it stops. So the first phase, which is here dotted, is the skid phase. So this is your starting speed, 2.5 meters for this putt here. And then the dotted phase is the skid phase. So you lose much more energy in the skid phase because the kinetic energy is translated into roll energy. And once the ball starts rolling, so this is a time line down here. Once the ball starts rolling, it's on a more or less stable linear deceleration. Certainly if you play a brake, it would not be completely linear because in the beginning it might be more uphill and then more downhill. But on a straight putt, this is a linear deceleration. And now, based on this raw data, we can calculate the skid phase, which is gray here. We can calculate the speed drop, which you see here. We can calculate the roll phase and the roll speed and the roll ratio and the effective stem. So this data can be directly calculated out of this raw data coming from the ball tracking system. And just to show you how accurate the system really is, so if you see this thin gray line underneath here, so this is the true ball data which is collected by the camera. And here certainly we see the bump into the hole and the ball stops, but you see that these linear regressions for skid phase and for roll phase match up perfectly what the ball actually does based on what the camera measures. So our data is very, very accurate. So we don't fake it in a way that we just show estimations. You can also look at the raw data. So this is very accurate what we can do here. And maybe one last comment, you can also certainly then combine PuttLab data with ball direction data. For example, in tables, you can certainly do this in reportings because then you can exchange the tires and arrange it. On the left side, you see putter data for launch. On the right side, you see some data for ball tracking, but you can also combine it in tables. So let's say for phase and path and ball tracker start direction of the ball, you might combine the data. For example, we have here the data for phase angle which is 0.0 closed and the path is 1.58 closed, but as an outcome, as measured from the ball tracking system, the ball would start at 0.1 to the left. Certainly for each individual putt, you can look at this, and not all the time it matches up 100% because there is some noise in there based on external effects like dimples, like mishits. But you can also compare, for example, launch conditions and skid distance and so on. So this is perfect for fitting. Okay, so far for the data here, and maybe some few words on ball tracking and 3D. Just to show you the different screens in 3D which are available. So if I'm selecting a putt in SAM PuttLab, and let us say, okay, this is still on duty. Let us say I select the putt number 5. So this putt just was bouncing back from the hole. And if I then look at 3D, I will see exactly the same putt here. And I can now do different views like traveling with the ball. I can look at it from the hole. And certainly I can add now all the information I want to see, like face angles or swing planes or whatever. This is optional. I can do a split screen. Sorry, this was wrong. I can do a split screen where you can see in the upper half your putter, in the lower half you see the ball. And then I might add, for example, your swing plane, and so on and so on. So these are all options which are available in 3D. And if we prolong this to video, we might even go to video. And now we can scroll through additionally the video and 3D. For example, if we look at the putt from the hole, we can even scroll through what the ball is doing. So this is really one-to-one. So we are not even able to scroll through what the putter does. We are also able to scroll through ball action. So there are a lot of options you have in this environment, really visualizing actually everything for the benefit of your student. Okay, so far, any questions? We would go now into breaking putts and slopes. So we need to talk about simulation. Where's our simulation coming from? Well, we have been developing very, very accurate algorithms to recalculate everything which happens on a putting surface. So sometimes even physics do not really match up with true reality, as artificial surfaces are very different as compared to, for example, the environment out on a true putting green, and then the hardness of the surface and so on. They all influence actually what's going on the putting green. So we are able to really simulate it in a way that it matches 100% what's going on. So we have internal calibration routines which really allow us to predict what will go on. And we are then able to use this information on one side, if we start projection, to provide feedback to you before the putt, or then to analyze and provide feedback after the putt. And by introducing projection, you have just unlimited amount of ways of helping the student to learn, because basically what we design here is a learning system, and learning system means that actually you experience what's going on. You can have feedback on the different aspects, visual feedback also, relative to the data, which is important. So it's not about only having fun and looking at a trace, it's trying to understand the significance of the trace and why the trace is having this specific shape and why you missed this putt is coming back also to data. And then now the communication between the coach and the student, or the feedback we can pop up on the screens if the student is working alone, will have a huge benefit for our students to be much more solid in breaking putts. So let's step into it by starting with a right to left break. And we will maybe close down this screen here. Okay.
Okay, let's just play a putt. Okay, and actually he missed this putt. We will talk about the feedback just in a second. So first of all, what you see is that there are data tiles on here, so you can project results directly on the surface with projection for any putt, for straight putts, for breaking putts. You can select which parameter you want to see. In this case, we see phase change, we see spot at impact or forward swing time. You get also a rating. So just by projecting this in front of your student, it's very easy to practice specific aspects in your putting, which will be used in training plans mostly. But we also see the data relative to this ideal putt, 3% of slope, and we see he missed on the low side. Now, this is ingenious feedback because actually, well, you see you missed on the low side, and he might see it was a little bit slow, but he would not know about aim angle. So he might play the next putt faster, but still the interdependency between speed and break is important for feedback. So the question is, why do amateurs have so much problems with breaking putts? It's the lack of appropriate feedback, and once you play in the studio, in the SAM studio, you see different data for speed and break, and then you can find out on which side you missed more or less. And this is shown in this report. So we see that relative direction was right, which is with a score of 80%, and speed was slow with 49%. So he was aiming high, but speed was too slow, so he was even aiming too high, and the number 80% would tell us that the mistake for aim was less relevant than the mistake for speed. So for the next putt, he should try to adjust speed first. Okay, can you do that? He gets a signal that you're ready to putt. Once you're ready to putt, you can go. Okay, this putt was actually on the opposite side. It started maybe on the right line, but it was way too fast. So I would say a good solution would be somewhere in between. We see it was 97% for aim angle relative to the ideal putt, but a big problem for speed, way too fast. So actually we know that his problem on breaking putts is more speed than break. And now we can find out, okay, how much speed do I need to play to get it onto this cone? There's another graph here which shows you about the interdependency between speed and break. you have a gray area, which is a little bit like a banana, and if you are inside of the banana, you are still able to hold this putt. If you're outside, there would be no chance to hold this putt. So if we look at the two dots, they are outside of the gray range completely. So even if you would, for example, for the slow putt, change direction, you would never be able to hold the putt. Now for this last putt, if you would aim very low, it might have met the hole, because on the same level, what you see here for fast, if you go left, you might have met the hole, but at a very high speed, which is maybe also what you want to avoid. But you get a very, very distinct feedback on actually the factors which are important and relevant for this putt. Again, here you can simulate actually in 3D, virtual reality, this putt as seen from the hole. You can travel with the ball. You can look at the different aspects. You can look down here. Now let's come back again to what you see here. If you are over the ball, can you play another putt? We have now introduced a spot here, which is the ideal once you are ready to go. You see a spot here, which would be the ideal aim to help him to, once he is at the ideal aim, only focus now on speed, because he has clarified now aim, this is done, now only try to get the right speed. And what he needs to do now is to really become soft in the hands, become soft in the motion, slowing down, really trying to create feel. So can you try to activate feel by really smoothly moving back and forth, not in a hurry. Okay. Much better. We will see higher scores now. We see now 60% for speed, 91 for break. And now his task would be to try to match up the putting stroke relative to this corridor. Aim angle is okay now, then only focus on speed. Again too fast, so he's switching from slow to fast. Now I might give him another help, which is try to focus on the end of the ideal path. So the ball needs to get to the end. So try to imagine how fast need the ball to be to end up exactly at the end of the ideal path line. So try to focus on the last section of your putt and try to match the force you use to getting that much behind the hole. Okay, this was already touching the hole. So you see, this was a little bit high, so we missed it to the right, but the speed was much better. The speed was almost, if you look at this, the speed was not too bad, almost perfect, but it was slightly high. So this is the way how you can train inside of this learning environment. We can now switch on and off different feedback. So we have a dialogue here. So we could say, okay, we want to project start position. It could be a cross, target position, slope arrows. We might now visualize maybe the slope. We have ideal aim line, ideal aim spot. We have ideal path, ideal corridors. And we can draw different data types. So there's also a chance to activate and deactivate different targets. Now let's just do exactly the same on a left to right break, and let's check how he reacts to the opposite side on the putting green.
Okay, so I just check in the chat. Glenn Coombe says, Christian, I think it's important to mention pre-shot routine for the development of experimental memory attempting putts as reaction to prior efforts. Yeah, certainly. To be honest, I will not talk about these coaching aspects at this point in time in depth, because we will have the chance to listen to Preston afterwards. He would really go into all the details which are relevant for teaching coaching. So my task here is more to show you what can be done in a more general way. Certainly, we know we are having coaches and there are different methods, different philosophies. But what we want to promote here is the objective feedback that relative to how you teach and relative to what you think a player should learn, you can use all this information, all this feedback, and feed it back to your students to improve the effort, the efficiency of learning, and to improve transfer. So let me just continue with a putt to the opposite side, again by Christian, and you will wonder what happens if he goes to the other side, because all of a sudden things change a lot.
Now let us play a left to right breaking putt, again 3%. We again help you with this aim line to orient, and let's check how you are able to manage the speed now. Ooh, so this was far better. And looking at the data, we see that the relative direction was now slightly left. Speed was slightly slow, but it was now very close to the gray area. So this putt could have been holed already. It was still a little bit slow, but it was much more close. Can you play another putt, please? You need to wait until ready and then you can go. I think this putt was already perfect. We look at the data and we see now 96% for direction and 100% for speed. So I think you learned something now. So ideal speed was perfectly matching up, and you see the dot is in the center of this break speed, green, and the blue line, which is your putt, followed perfectly the ideal path. If you look at this, you can see how perfectly you played this putt. Okay, that's brilliant. Now we make it a little bit more complicated for you, a little bit difficult. We switch off the different types of information and we see if you can translate it also to your normal putt. So just play the putt again. So he's still seeing his aim angle, but no more feedback for ideal. Let's check how we can translate this into his normal putting stroke. Again hold, so he's much more solid for left to right as compared to right to left. And this is a very general finding that many players have one chocolate side and one problem side, and your chocolate side is definitely left to right. And very interesting that you get the speed much more better on a left to right as compared to right to left. So this certainly has to do with your perception also. So you're, from a visual, you see a better picture here. And so we need to certainly work on right to left more, on left to right. But now let us even increase the challenge a little bit by putting it downwards, and let's check how he reacts to this type of intervention.
Okay, so we've seen that he is so much better on left to right, and we maybe have talked about these aiming tendencies, and we know there's a lot of sense in working on perception also. But as I said, I don't want to go too deep into that, but if we make it now more complicated, if it's now downhill, we will see how he reacts to this.
Now we made it a little bit more difficult even by getting downhill slope additionally to left and right brake. This is 2% left-right brake and 1% downhill, which is basically increasing the stimp or the speed. So he needs now also to react to downhill. We removed a little bit of the feedback, so there's no more ideal trace. Now there's only slowest and fastest corridor, so somewhere in between would be your optimum. And then we use a virtual hole now. We can project a virtual hole to any position. We can just define where the target should be, so we remove the hole, and we can now use artificial holes also. Okay, you need to switch on the sensor, and I think then we are ready to go. Okay, let's just check. So this was very much up to the left. So this was an aim which was way too high. Speed was again very nice. So again you managed to get the speed right, but this was definitely too far left. So we can put him into different scenarios. We can then come to uphill putts, short putts, longer putts, putts which are across the surface, not in the center. So this is all possible, and this could be predefined in protocols also, which would be training plans. Okay, thank you very much so far, and I hope you learned something from today.
Okay, so far to the technology. Maybe I did not explain exactly what we do with the platform. This platform is synchronized, so we can put it to any angle. I didn't show you how we steer it. There's an app for that. And there are different platforms actually out there. The three most prominent are what we're using in the US is the Putting Perfection platform. In Europe, it is certainly the Zen, Oracle Zen Stage, which is a premium product also. And then there is another product from Putt, which is a little bit cheaper, but there are also differences in the quality of the product. So we hope that in the future, there will be something which is maybe offered worldwide, so that we can deliver this to any place in the world. And this is just the beginning of working with movable platforms in putting. So I think in a very short amount of time, we will have much more options on that. And we also work on improving certainly the ability to integrate with all these platforms in a variable learning environment. Okay, so much more comes from Preston in 5 minutes if he starts talking about his teaching, coaching. Let me just finish here with a little bit of more fun. So at the very end, I played a small game against Christian, because in the beginning, if you had seen the first lesson, he was really putting on a poor level, and he learned so much in these 2 hours of filming that afterwards we got into a small competition, which I will show you now, just to finish with today's session.
There are several options working in the SAM Studio. You might use training programs, you might use the live feedback. So there are very different settings, and one of the options is gaming, so you can practice with fun. So there's a button down here, it says 3D games. Let's just play a game. We have several games offered already, and first you need to select the player. This is Christian, and maybe I add Sam as a second player. We select Sweet Spot Challenge, make 5 putts, hit the ball as closest as possible to the sweet spot. Certainly you also should try to hold the putt, and then you get a score relative to the spot on the face. And there's a money ball with 200 points and 5 putts, so the maximum score would be 600. Let's just start. Christian, can you start, please? We need a calibration first, and then we are ready to go. So next player is Christian. First putt, please. Oh, very nice. $95 out of 100. That's a very good number. Second putt. And this putt counts double, so there's pressure now on him. Ooh, 94. So overall 522. I think that's a new high score. So let me try to beat him. And now the last one. Oh,